Okay, so you guys had a chance to answer the do now question. You filled out the attendance form, so away we go. First thing, what is geography? So when I put a slide up, I'm going to give you guys a chance to take down your notes. I'm going to give you 60 seconds or so after I put it up, or I'm not going to speak because I want you guys to just focus on the notes and what's going on, on the sheet, in the slide. And then after that, if I have anything to add, I will add it. So I'm going to shut up for a minute, let you guys take your notes, and then I'll come back. So pay attention to the subtopic. What is geography is the subtopic. And pay attention to your details. Pay attention to what is bolded in red. All right? So I'll give you guys a minute, catch up, and then we'll go from there. All right, so subtopic, what is geography? So if we're doing it the way I prescribed, it should go all the way up against the left margin, directly underneath the AIM number and the AIM question. So what is geography? Next line down, indent, bullet point. Geography is the study of the physical environment and how humans interact with it. It determines the way we live, adaptations made to survive, and changes to the environment they have made. So when we think of geography, I think we typically think of naturally occurring things. We think of rivers and mountains and hills and grass and trees and rocks, and that's geography. But in addition to that, a baseball stadium is geography also. The Empire State Building is geography. A farm is geography. A house, a structure, is geography. Poured concrete is geography because it's adapting the environment to suit our needs. So that's, the first thing that we need to understand. When we talk about what is geography, it's the land and the changes we make to it to kind of better fit our lives. All right, so these are a bunch of different geographic features. You guys listed a bunch of them, and we will kind of go through them one at a time. So again, process, not product. We know that you guys know what a lot of these are, and I'm not teaching you anything. So focus on process. So I'll give you a second to copy what's important on the slide. So a couple of people mentioned plateau, flat area that rises above the land nearby. It's kind of like a tabletop in the, with valley all around it. So it's, when we think of a canyon or a valley, it's kind of the opposite of that. A valley is a low-lying area with, surrounded by mountains on all sides. This is kind of a reverse of that. This is a tall, flat area that rises above the land all around it. So plateau. Next one, straight. So you take a second, get your subtopic in the right place, get your detail in the right place. So I'm thinking back to the chat box, and I don't think anyone said straight. In reality, this is one of the more historically significant geographic features. Entire empires will be built on the idea of controlling a strait. We're going to come across that in the first couple of units. We're going to see this. But if you think about it, if you control a strait, you control the land on both sides of that strait, that narrow strip of water. You control who travels through that strait. Okay? And before the advent of planes and things like that, goods and entire economies are built on shipping over waterway. So if you control a critical strait that is of a strategic location, and you control the land on both sides of that, and you control who comes and goes through there, you can economize trade and travel. It's like you think about it like setting up a toll booth, for example. All right. So straits are not to be underestimated. And we will see a couple different examples of entire Empires that are built on the control of a stream. Tough one, lake. All right, I don't think I need to kind of go on and on about lake. It's just a body of water surrounded by land on all sides. That's all. Next one. Desert. This one is interesting. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to copy the stuff here, and you'll notice that this has a lot more detail than some of the previous slides. So each one of those bullet points is a different detail. So put them, in descending order. Desert is your subtopic up against the left margin. Indent, bullet point, dry region that experiences low precipitation. Next detail, bullet point. Many are formed by mountains blocking the path of precipitation. And don't forget, it's a lot easier to copy just what's in red. I'll give you a second to catch up. So I expect all of this to be a little bit slow going. You guys are kind of out of practice when it comes to this kind of an activity, and I get that. So while the rest of you finish up, I'm just going to kind of explain some of this to you. So if you look on the image on the bottom left, it says Atacama Desert. The Atacama Desert is the driest place on Earth. And the first thing we need to note is that desert has nothing to do with heat. I think that when we think of desert, we typically think of, sand dunes in the Sahara and the sun, and, it's 100,000 degrees and, it's terrible. A desert is not about temperature, it's about humidity. So deserts are all about how dry it is, not how hot it is. In fact, some of the driest places on Earth are the North and South Pole. The relative humidity in the air is basically nothing. So those are called polar deserts. Those are actually deserts. They are super dry. We think, just because there's pack ice up there, that how could it be a desert? But what a desert is about is the relative humidity in the air at any given time. And those places are super dry. Now, a lot of times, deserts are created by what's called rain shadow, and that effect is kind of illustrated in this image on the right. So we said the Atacama Desert is the driest place on Earth. So this is kind of a cross-section of the land that shows why this is the case. So you can see the star here where it says Atacama Desert. So if you look on the right of the image, prevailing southeast trade winds pick up moisture from the ocean, and then it starts climbing the mountainside of the Andes Mountains. And as it gets pushed higher and higher and higher up the side of the mountain, all the precipitation condenses and dumps rain on what's called the windward side of the mountain. When that air mass gets over, it dumps all the moisture in the air on the mountainside. And when that air mass gets to the other side of the mountain, it is super dry. So this is what that rain shadow is, and this is why it creates the driest place on Earth, the Atacama Desert. So a little Earth science for you too. Next one, river. Okay, so while you finish up, river, natural path of water fueled by an ocean or lake. Rivers that are fueled by oceans, in the parts of the river that are closest to the ocean, that's salt water, and it eventually becomes fresh water the further you go. So that's a phenomenon that happens all the time. Rivers that come from lakes, it depends on the lake. There are saltwater lakes. Salt Lake City, the Great Salt Lake in Salt Lake City, Utah is a good example. So depending on the lake, that determines the salinity of the water, if it's fresh water or if it's salt water. Again, the first civilizations that we study will be cropping up around rivers. So river is kind of the cradle of civilization as we know it, and it is kind of the starting point for every civilization that we will study. So the beginning of modern civilization is dependent entirely on access to a river. So the first major unit that we get into is River Valley civilizations, the big four that we will study, and it is all because of the river. They all grow up right on the banks of the river, and they all develop around this geographic feature. So not to be underestimated. River, then island. Okay, islands. Landmass entirely surrounded by water. Manhattan is an island. Australia is an island. The Galapagos is made up of several islands. Okay, we're this is not foreign to us. We should know what islands are. All right, this one's always fun, and it is pronounced archipelago. Okay, inevitably, students will constantly just call this, "Yo, Mister, it's the archipelago." It's not an archipelago. Good try. It's an archipelago. That is what it's called. Inevitably, I will correct some of you 1,000 times, and the 1,001st time that you say that, you will call it archipelago again. For some reason, kids love calling it that. I don't know if they just can't wrap their brain around the word or whatever, but it's archipelago, group of islands. Japan, Philippines, Hawaii is an example. One of the first major classical civilizations that we will study is ancient Greece. Greece is an archipelago, and that kind of impacts their development and their societies very greatly. So, not to be underestimated. Peninsula. So this is like basically a little strip of land that kind of sticks out into the water. That's the best way to kind of describe what it is. The easiest example for us always is Florida. We know that Florida is a peninsula. It's this little handle on the bottom of America here. The picture on the right is the Korean Peninsula. So this is North Korea and South Korea. You can see that land kind of sticks out into water, and it's kind of surrounded on all sides by water except one little connection to the mainland. That's pretty much how peninsulas take shape. We're almost done, guys. Hang in there. All right, so mountain range. I mean, we know what a mountain range is. Okay, back to Earth science. This is when tectonic plates, which are the plates that kind of are floating over the core of the Earth, when they collide and buckle on the surface. This is what creates either an earthquake. Number one, when they separate, or when they collide, they can create a mountain range, and that's basically how mountain ranges are created. Now, mountain ranges are important for a number of reasons. Depending on how tall the mountain range is, it keeps cultures separate from each other. That's a big thing. Okay, so if you look at this map, the people of Ohio and the people of Maryland are separated by this mountain range, right? So depending on what ability they have, if neither of these civilizations possess the ability to cross that mountain range, they may not even know that the other one exists. So this serves to keep cultures separate from each other. Mountain ranges and other geographic features, for example, are also used to figure out boundaries. Before we decide on political boundaries and just start drawing lines on a map to separate states from each other, before that, territories are separated by geographic features: the Mississippi River, the Appalachian Mountains, etc. Well, the Rio Grande, Texas, separates Texas and Mexico. So back in the day, we used to use geographic features to separate territories. And then we eventually decided to just start drawing imaginary lines. So that's why if you look in the East Coast, you can see some of the boundaries of the states are dependent on geographic features. So if you look at the western border of North Carolina, for example, that follows right along with the Appalachian Mountains, and that makes sense. The Mississippi River, a little further west, separates the states from each other. And then you start go look at the boundaries out west in Nevada and Arizona and Colorado and New Mexico. It's just a bunch of imaginary squares because we didn't, we had the technology to survey and draw those boundaries in a way that we didn't have before. And also, if it's all just dry and flat, there's not a lot of geographic features to separate one territory from another. So that's why they did it that way. All right. So the last thing we got to do. Here we go. Let me pause